On the night of their third wedding anniversary, while 500 guests raised crystal glasses in the ballroom below, Vivienne Varela stood alone in a marble bathroom holding a pregnancy test and made the most dangerous decision of her life. Not because she stopped loving her husband, but because she loved the child growing inside her too much to let it be born into his world. She set the test on the edge of the sink, pulled off her wedding rings, and placed them beside it like a confession. Then she walked out of the estate without looking back. If you've ever had to choose between love and survival, you already know how this story ends. Hit like, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and follow along, because what happens next will break you. The anniversary party had been Dominic's idea. Everything was always Dominic's idea. The estate in Westchester, the imported Italian marble floors, the security detail that followed Vivienne to her own bedroom door like she was a head of state or a prisoner. The distinction had grown thinner over 3 years. She'd stopped trying to measure it. The guest list ran to 500 names. Politicians, judges, men whose faces appeared on the covers of financial magazines and whose money had origins that would never survive scrutiny. They came because Dominic Varela summoned them, and people summoned by Dominic Varela did not decline. Not twice, anyway. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a dream. White orchids cascading from the ceiling, candlelight burning in clusters of 100 at a time. A string quartet positioned near the east windows playing pieces that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. Vivienne had stood in the middle of it during the setup that afternoon and felt nothing. That numbness had been building for a long time. She recognized it now, the way you recognize a slow leak in a tire. Not when it starts, but only after you've already drifted off the road. She'd smiled through the florist's presentation. She'd nodded when the event coordinator asked about seating arrangements for the senator's table. She'd touched the centerpieces with her fingertips and said they were beautiful, and somewhere behind her sternum a voice had said, "Clearly, and without drama, you are disappearing." It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't even grief, exactly. It was more like watching yourself from the outside and finally admitting that the woman in the mirror had been replaced by something hollow, wearing her face. She'd gone upstairs at 5:15 to finish getting ready. That's when she found the test. She hadn't been trying to find anything. She'd reached under the sink for a new bar of soap, and her hand closed around a small cardboard box she didn't remember buying. The receipt inside was dated 6 weeks prior. She had bought it, she realized. Bought it and forgotten, or bought it and been afraid to use it, which amounted to the same thing. She stood there in her bathrobe with the box in her hand for a long moment. Then she used it. She set it on the counter and sat on the cold tile floor and waited. The result came in under 2 minutes. She stared at it for much longer than that. Her first thought was not joy. Her second thought was not fear. Her first real, coherent thought, the kind that cuts through shock like a blade through silk, was, "He will never let us go now." And that thought settled it. She had been planning the escape for 4 months. Not in the way people plan things when they're romanticizing their own misery. Not with vague fantasies of running away that dissolve by morning. She had planned it with the same cold precision she'd watched Dominic apply to every problem that crossed his desk. A separate phone, purchased with cash, kept inside the lining of a coat in the back of her closet. A bank account in a name that wasn't hers, funded in small amounts over 16 months through a layered system she'd constructed so carefully, she was almost proud of it. A contact. A man named Gerald, who drove a private car service and owed a significant debt to a woman who had once been Vivienne's college roommate. A bag already packed and hidden in a storage unit 40 minutes from the estate, registered under a false name. She had built the door. She simply hadn't been ready to open it. Now she was. She rose from the bathroom floor and dressed methodically. The gown she'd had altered for tonight hung on the back of the door. Deep blue silk, off-shoulder, the kind of dress that made Dominic's expression go still in a way that used to make her feel powerful. She put it on. She did her hair. She applied makeup with a steady hand that surprised her because nothing else about this moment felt steady. She had approximately 2 hours before the party began, and Dominic would expect her beside him. She wrote the note first, 1 page, handwritten. She'd rehearsed the words so many times in her head over the past months that they came without hesitation now. She didn't explain everything. That would have required a novel. She explained enough. That she wasn't leaving because she hated him. That she was leaving because she could not watch a child grow up in the shadow of what he was. That she needed him not to look for her. That last part she knew was meaningless, even as she wrote it, but she wrote it anyway, because she was still the kind of woman who believed in asking. She left the note on his pillow. She left the rings beside it, the engagement ring he'd proposed with in Rome 3.5 years ago, and the wedding band he'd slid onto her finger in a ceremony attended by 100 people she barely knew. She looked at them for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned away and didn't look again. The pregnancy test she dropped in the trash bin beneath the bathroom sink pushed to the back. She had not thought that through. She realized it later, much later, but in the moment she simply did not want him to know. Not yet. Not until she was somewhere he couldn't reach. She went downstairs the long way, through the east wing, which was still quiet at this hour. Caterers focused on the main hall. Security concentrated at the front gate where early guests were beginning to arrive. She moved through the kitchen, nodded at a sous chef who didn't register her presence, and slipped out through the delivery entrance into the thin October air. Gerald was waiting on a service road 200 yards east of the estate's back wall. He had the engine running. He didn't ask questions. That had been part of the arrangement. She got in. He drove. She looked straight ahead and breathed through her mouth and did not allow herself to look back at the lights of the estate receding in the passenger mirror. She allowed herself one thing, one small, terrible thing, which was to think about Dominic's face when he found the note. She thought about it for approximately 7 seconds, and then she stopped. Because if she thought about it any longer, she would ask Gerald to turn the car around. She was not going to ask Gerald to turn the car around. The first hour of driving was the hardest. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back very straight, and she watched Pennsylvania arrive through the windshield like a slowly developing photograph. The suburbs thinning, the interstate stretching out, the lights of the city releasing its grip on the dark. Her jaw ached. She hadn't realized she'd been clenching it. Gerald put the radio on low. Classic rock from a station that kept fading in and out. Neither of them spoke. Around midnight, they reached a motel outside Harrisburg. 2 stories, exterior corridors, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask for identification if you presented it as an oversight. Vivian had researched it on the burner phone. She'd paid in advance through a third party. The room key was waiting in an envelope at the front desk under the name she'd chosen, Margaret Ellis. Gerald pulled into the lot and put the car in park. He was 53 years old, former military, and had the particular quality of a man who had seen enough of the world to know when not to speak. He handed her a brown envelope from the center console, her go-bag essentials that had been pulled from the storage unit earlier that day, per arrangement. Cash, 2 IDs, a prepaid credit card, a burner phone already loaded with 3 contacts she might need. "You're sure?" he said. It wasn't a question exactly. "I'm sure," she said. She wasn't entirely sure, but she was sure enough. She took the envelope and got out of the car and walked to her room without looking back at him either. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale air, and it was the most private space she'd inhabited in 3 years, and she sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and shook for approximately 90 seconds. Not crying. She didn't cry. Just shaking, the way a building shakes after an explosion, the aftermath of impact, the body processing what the mind has already decided to survive. Then she stopped shaking and got up and washed her face. She peeled off the blue dress and folded it, and set it on the chair by the window. She pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt from the go-bag. She sat back on the bed with the burner phone and opened a list she'd been building for 4 months. A list of next steps, ordered by priority, that began with, make contact with Dr. Reyes, and ended with, do not contact anyone from your former life, ever. She was halfway through the list when the first cramp hit. Not a bad one, just a reminder. Her body acknowledging the weight of everything. She pressed her palm flat against her lower stomach and held it there and thought about what the test had told her, which she had been carefully not thinking about for the past several hours. She was going to have a child, in a motel room in Pennsylvania, running from the most dangerous man she had ever known, who was also the man she had spent 3 years loving in that complicated, consuming, ultimately suffocating way you love someone who is both the best and worst thing that has ever happened to you. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and allowed herself to feel it, the full weight of it, for exactly 5 minutes. The fear and the grief and the terrifying, guilty, humiliating flicker of something that was almost hope. Then she set a timer on the burner phone for 5:45 a.m. and closed her eyes. She needed to sleep. Tomorrow was going to require everything she had. Dominic Varela returned to the bedroom at 12:47 a.m. He knew the exact time because he'd checked his watch on the stairs. A habit, cataloging the world in precise intervals, which was one of the many things that made him exceptional at his work and difficult to live with. The party had gone 3 hours. He'd given the anniversary toast alone, which he'd covered by telling the room that his wife wasn't feeling well, and had watched the assembled faces perform sympathy with varying degrees of conviction. He'd known something was wrong since 9 p.m. He'd known because Vivian was not a woman who got sick on schedule, and she was not a woman who missed an entrance if she had anything to say about it, and she was not a woman whose absence failed to alter the specific temperature of whatever room she wasn't in. He'd sent Elena, his head of household staff, upstairs at 9:15 to check on her. Elena had come back looking careful, which was not an expression Elena wore often, and said that Vivian appeared to be resting and had asked not to be disturbed. He had accepted that. He'd moved through the rest of the party with a surface of perfect composure and a specific kind of dread building behind his eyes that he had learned through long practice to keep entirely invisible. He opened the bedroom door. The room was dark. He turned on the lamp by the door, low setting, and saw the bed was made, hadn't been slept in. The dressing table was clear except for a bottle of perfume she'd left behind. He walked toward the bathroom and stopped when he saw the note on the pillow. He stood there for a moment without touching it. Then he picked it up. He read it twice, not because the words were unclear, her handwriting was precise, her sentences direct, but because the first time through, his mind kept trying to reframe what he was reading into something other than what it was. The second read made it impossible. He set the note down. He looked at the rings beside it. He looked at them for a while. The emerald-cut diamond he'd had reset 3 times before she'd approved it. The wedding band with the interior engraving she didn't know he'd added until the morning after the ceremony. He walked into the bathroom. He stood at the sink. He opened the medicine cabinet, her products still there, which meant she'd left with almost nothing, which meant this had been planned. You don't leave with almost nothing by accident. You leave with almost nothing when you've already moved everything that matters somewhere else. He was turning to leave when the trash bin caught his eye. The white stick was pushed to the back but not buried. He'd have missed it if he weren't the kind of man who noticed everything and processed it immediately and understood most things before he'd finished looking at them. He reached in and picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. The silence in the bathroom was the particular silence of a room where something enormous has just happened but hasn't finished happening yet. His wife wasn't just gone. She was carrying his child, and she had decided to disappear rather than tell him. He set the test on the edge of the sink, same place she must have set it, he would realize later, and walked out of the bathroom and out of the bedroom and down the hall to his office. He sat down behind the desk. He did not pick up his phone immediately. He sat with his hands flat on the desk surface for approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes was a long time for Dominic Varela to sit still and not act. It was the amount of time it took him to decide what kind of operation this was going to be. Because he was, before anything else, before husband, before father, before the particular kind of man who had stood in a Manhattan ballroom at age 27 and decided that he would be the last person in any room to ever lose. He was a man who solved problems with overwhelming total force. Every problem. Always. But this was not that kind of problem. He understood that in those 3 minutes. He understood it with a clarity that surprised him, because clarity in moments of extremity was something he'd cultivated deliberately over 20 years, and it almost always served him, but it had never been directed at something that made his hands feel like they were made of concrete. She was afraid. She was afraid of what he was and what his world would do to their child. And she was right to be afraid. He had known that for a long time, longer than he'd been willing to look at directly. That did not mean he was going to let her disappear. He picked up his phone and made the first call. By 1 a.m., the search had begun. He started with the driver. He always started with the thread that would unravel fastest. Vivian had left the property through the delivery entrance. He knew that within the first hour, once his security director pulled the exterior camera logs and found the gap. The East Wing camera had been blocked by a catering van from 9:48 to 10:22 p.m. Deliberate. Someone had known where the cameras were. He sat with that knowledge and let it tell him what it needed to tell him. She had help from inside the property, or from someone who'd had access to the security layout. His household staff had been vetted twice when they were hired and monitored continuously. But vetting wasn't perfect. Money made gaps. He interviewed 4 staff members personally between 1 and 3 a.m., not in the way law enforcement interviewed people. In the way Dominic Varela interviewed people, which was efficient and thorough and left no room for evasion. 3 of them were genuinely ignorant. The 4th, a junior member of the catering staff who'd been brought in specifically for the anniversary event, had sweat on his upper lip in a room that was 68 degrees. The conversation with him was brief. A name came out of it. Not the driver. A layer below the driver. A woman named Constance Marsh, who had been Vivian's college roommate, who lived in Brooklyn, and who had apparently remained in contact with Vivian through channels Dominic hadn't been monitoring because he hadn't thought he needed to monitor them. He had thought a great many things he was now revising. He didn't move on Constance Marsh immediately. He filed her away and continued working outward. His surveillance coordinator, a man named Thatch, who had built the network over 8 years and knew it better than anyone, pulled financial data through back channels within the first 2 hours. Vivian's primary account showed no unusual activity in the past month, but Thatch was thorough. It was the secondary search, the ghost search, Thatch called it, looking for activity adjacent to a subject's known patterns, that found it. Small cash movements, irregular, routed through a cleaning service of all things, and then into an account in the name of a Margaret Ellis. Thatch cross-referenced Margaret Ellis against property records, service records, anything that would give her a shape. What he found was a storage unit 40 miles north of the city. By 4 a.m., a team was at the storage unit. It had been recently accessed. The log showed an entry earlier that same day. The unit was empty except for a single wire hanger on the floor and a receipt fragment that had been torn almost in half. The receipt was from a pharmacy, dated 6 weeks prior. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area code. Thatch put it together in 12 minutes and brought it to Dominic without editorial. Dominic looked at the receipt fragment for a long time. Then he looked at the map on his laptop and thought about a woman who was 5 weeks pregnant and alone in Pennsylvania, trying to build a wall between herself and the life she'd spent 3 years inside. He thought about what she must have felt, sitting in that bathroom with a test in her hand, and deciding that disappearing was safer than telling him. He pressed his fist against his mouth and sat with that for a long moment. Then he began to systematically turn the eastern seaboard upside down. By dawn, his face was on every screen that mattered. Not his face, hers. He'd made that decision deliberately. He circulated her photograph through his networks with a description and a number. Not a reward offer, nothing that crude, not yet. Just a quiet, pervasive notification that moved through the underground the way water moves through concrete, finding every crack, every gap, every loose seam. He also did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He called in every debt. There were men in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh who owed him things that couldn't be quantified in currency. He called them. He explained the situation with economy. His wife had left. He needed to know where she was. He needed her brought back safely. Safely was a word he said with particular emphasis, because some of the men he was calling had a certain understanding of retrieval operations that didn't include that component by default. He wasn't sleeping. He hadn't slept since before the party. His shoulder had the dull ache it always developed after 18 hours without rest, the old injury from a night in his late 20s that he'd stopped thinking about. His assistant brought him coffee at intervals. He drank it without tasting it. He kept thinking about the note. She'd written, "I need you to understand that this isn't because I don't know who you are. It's because I do." He'd read those 2 sentences more times than he'd read anything in the past decade. They sat in him the way shrapnel sits in a wound. Not dangerous anymore, but impossible to remove cleanly. She knew exactly who he was. She'd known from the beginning. He had never lied to her about that. It was the thing about Vivian that had gotten under his skin in the first year and never come out. She had looked at him, the real shape of him, without flinching, and stayed. Until now. The question he kept arriving at was simple, and he didn't have an answer for it. What did I do wrong? And then the second question, which was quieter and more devastating, did I do anything right? His security director, Marcus, appeared in the doorway at 7:42 a.m. "We found the driver," Marcus said. Dominic looked up from the desk. "Where?" "Brooklyn. He's a car service. Private. No criminal record, clean as a whistle on paper." Marcus paused. "His name is Gerald Fountain. He's got a connection to a Constance Marsh. Marsh went to college with—" "I know who Marsh went to college with," Dominic said. "Where's Fountain now?" "Sitting in his kitchen eating breakfast. My guys have eyes on the building." Dominic stood up. "Bring him to me," he said. "Quietly and gently, Marcus. I mean that. He's not the target. He's the thread." Marcus nodded and left. Dominic walked to the window and looked out at the estate grounds in the early morning light. The tents from the party were still standing, white and silver, slightly deflated now, the way celebrations always look the morning after, smaller, slightly sad, stripped of their electricity. A crew was beginning to break them down. He thought about what Vivian had said in the note, about the life she couldn't watch their child grow up inside, about the guns and the blood and the enemies and the endless grinding fear of what lived on the other side of his work. He pressed his palm flat against the cold window glass. He thought about a conversation he'd had 6 months ago in a closed room with 3 men he trusted absolutely. A conversation about exit timelines and asset transfers and legitimate entities into which an empire could be dissolved legally and permanently in a way that would hold up to the kind of scrutiny that had brought down men far less careful than him. He thought about the lawyers in Geneva and Zurich who had been working on that dissolution for 22 weeks. He thought about the deal that had been set to finalize on the same night his wife had been standing in a bathroom 2 floors above his head deciding to disappear. He thought about the conversation he'd planned to have with her. The one where he told her it was over. All of it. Permanently and irrevocably, and in ways that no court or competitor or ghost from the past could unwind. The one he hadn't gotten to have. He closed his eyes. Gerald Fountain arrived at the estate at 9:15 a.m. He was escorted, not roughly, to a room off the main hallway that served as a waiting area. Dominic came in alone. He dismissed the 2 men who'd brought Gerald and closed the door and sat across from him at a small table. Gerald Fountain was 53 years old, former military, the kind of man who had learned not to startle easily. He sat with his hands on the table and looked at Dominic and didn't look away. "I want to find my wife," Dominic said. "I want to find her, and I want her to be safe. That's the complete list." Gerald said nothing. "I know you drove her," Dominic said. "I know you left the estate at approximately 10:15 last night via the service road. I know you took her somewhere. I'm asking you directly to tell me where." Gerald's jaw moved slightly. "She asked me not to." "I understand that." She was scared. "I know she was scared." Dominic kept his voice level. "I'm not asking you to betray her trust because I want to cause her harm. I'm asking you because she is 5 weeks pregnant and alone, and whatever she's afraid of, she shouldn't be doing this alone." Gerald went very still. "You didn't know," Dominic said. "She didn't tell me," Gerald said. "She didn't tell me either," Dominic said. "I found the test in the trash." The silence between them had a particular quality. 2 men in a room, one of them with all the power, and neither of them with what they needed. "She's in Pennsylvania," Gerald said finally. "I took her to a motel outside Harrisburg. She paid in advance under a different name. She had everything planned out. IDs, cash, a whole system. She's been thinking about this for a long time." Dominic nodded. "The motel name," he said. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. Then he gave it. Dominic stood up. "You can go," he said. "Nobody's going to touch you. This conversation didn't happen." Gerald got up slowly. He paused at the door. "She's not stupid," he said. "Whatever you're planning, she's going to see it coming." "I know," Dominic said. "She's the smartest person I've ever met." He said it without self-pity, without bitterness, just as a fact about the world. The way you'd say, "The sun rises in the east." Gerald left. Dominic stood alone in the room for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. He arranged a convoy, 2 vehicles, 4 men he trusted with his life, and had trusted for years, men who understood what gently meant and what it didn't mean. He arranged a helicopter on standby. He went upstairs and changed his shirt. Then he got in the car and drove toward Pennsylvania at a speed that violated several laws. which had never in his life been something he'd considered a relevant constraint. She had a head start of 11 hours. He was going to close that gap. And what happened when he arrived? What he would say? What she would say? What the space between them would do when she saw him coming? He hadn't scripted. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Dominic Varela was moving towards something without a plan. Only the absolute bone-deep certainty that he was not going to let his wife and his unborn child disappear into the world without knowing the truth, whatever it cost him. He owed her that. In her motel room in Pennsylvania, Vivienne woke at 5:45 as planned, lay still for a moment listening to a truck on the interstate, and reached for the burner phone. She had 17 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She knew immediately that the number wasn't random. She sat up. She pressed her palm to her stomach, that gesture already becoming instinctive, the body orienting around something new. Outside the window, the parking lot was quiet. Cold blue October light. A few cars, none of them black SUVs, none of them idling. Not yet. She had maybe a few hours before he found her. She'd always known it would be a matter of hours, not days. The plan was never to outrun him permanently. It was to get far enough, fast enough, to establish herself somewhere he couldn't reach without triggering consequences that would cost him more than she was worth. She was beginning to think she'd miscalculated that part. She got up and started to pack. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was already clenching. Somewhere on the interstate, she was certain, a car was already moving in her direction. And the man inside it was the only person in the world who had ever made her feel completely safe. Which was also the reason she was running. She packed in 4 minutes flat. Not because she was panicking. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. But because she had rehearsed this moment so many times in the past 4 months that her hands moved without consulting her brain. Jeans, the second sweatshirt, the cash envelope, both IDs, the burner phone, the small notebook where she'd written the next 3 addresses in a handwriting deliberately different from her own. She rolled everything tight and pressed it into the backpack and zipped it in one motion. She stood at the window and looked at the parking lot for 30 seconds. Still quiet. The October light had gone from blue to pale gray. A man in a work jacket was loading something into a pickup 2 rows over. A woman walked a small dog along the sidewalk bordering the lot, moving without urgency. Nothing that looked like surveillance. Nothing that looked deliberate. That didn't mean it wasn't there. She'd learned that from watching Dominic's world operate for 3 years. The most effective presence was the one you never registered until it was too late. She pulled on her jacket, shouldered the backpack, and took one last look at the room. The blue dress was still folded on the chair. She'd meant to leave it. She left it. She went out through the ground floor exit that faced the service road rather than the main lot, which she'd identified the night before as a basic precaution, and walked 3 blocks north to the bus depot she'd mapped on the burner phone. The 6:45 to Philadelphia was already idling when she arrived. She paid cash, took a window seat toward the back, and set the backpack between her feet. She pressed her palm to her stomach once, lightly. Then she looked out the window and watched the motel disappear as the bus pulled out, and told herself she was not going to think about the 17 missed calls. She thought about them anyway. The convoy hit the Harrisburg Motel at 9:58 a.m. Marcus drove the lead vehicle. Dominic rode in the passenger seat, which Marcus had stopped trying to argue about in the 2nd year of his employment. Dominic didn't ride in the back. He never had. He said it made him feel like cargo, and he'd spent enough of his life being someone else's asset. The motel manager, a heavy-set man in his late 50s who smelled of coffee and had the particular wariness of someone who'd managed budget accommodations long enough to recognize trouble without being able to define it, met them at the front desk. He'd been called ahead by one of Dominic's people, which meant he was expecting something, though clearly not the specific shape of what arrived. Dominic put a photograph on the desk. "She checked in last night. I need the room number." The manager looked at the photograph. "We have a privacy policy." "I'm her husband," Dominic said. "She's pregnant. She left without her medication." It was the first lie he'd told in this entire operation. He noted it, filed it. The manager looked at the photograph again, then at Dominic. Something in Dominic's face made the calculation simple. He gave the room number, room 114. Ground floor, east corridor. Dominic walked there alone. He knocked, he waited, he knocked again. Silence. He looked at the door for a moment. Then he went back to the front desk and asked when the occupant had last been seen. The manager checked with the night staff. One of the overnight clerks, a young woman who'd been on until 7 a.m., said she'd seen a woman matching the description leaving through the east exit around 6:15. Backpack, moving quickly. Hadn't checked out formally. Dominic stood very still. The east exit, he said. Where does that put her? Service Road, the clerk said. There's a bus depot about 3 blocks north. The 6:45 to Philadelphia stops there. He looked at his watch. It was 5 minutes to 10. She had a 3-hour head start on a bus. He walked back to the car and got in and looked at the windshield for a moment without speaking. Marcus didn't say anything. He'd worked for Dominic long enough to know the shapes of his silences. Philadelphia, Dominic said finally. Marcus put the car in drive. Vivian reached Philadelphia at 9:40 a.m. and went straight to the secondary location she'd mapped, a hostel in West Philadelphia that rented rooms by the day, cash only, the kind of place that attracted backpackers and people in various states of transition and asked very little of any of them. She'd booked it 3 months ago under the Margaret Ellis name, paying forward. The room was small. Single bed, a window that looked onto a brick wall, a bathroom she shared with 2 other rooms on the floor. She sat on the bed and ate a granola bar from the backpack and opened the burner phone. She needed to call Dr. Reyes. That was priority 1. She needed prenatal information, needed to understand what the next weeks looked like physically, needed to know what she should and shouldn't be doing while she was doing the things she was doing. She also needed to make contact with the lawyer in Boston, a woman named Patterson who specialized in cases where people needed to disappear legally and who had been recommended through a chain of referrals so careful that Vivian had spent 2 months vetting it before she'd made the first approach. Patterson had paperwork ready. A new identity, more thoroughly constructed than the Margaret Ellis layer, a legitimate life with a verifiable employment history and a social security number that would hold up. She had a plan. The plan was intact. She just needed Dominic to be far enough behind her for the plan to actually work. She was pressing Patterson's number when the burner phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She stared at it. Different unknown number than the 17 from this morning. Different area code. She let it go to voicemail. There was no voicemail set up on the burner. The call ended. She called Patterson. Patterson answered on the second ring. She was 61 years old, precise in the way of someone who had spent 40 years making very fine distinctions matter very much. She didn't greet Vivian by name. She said, "Status." "I'm in Philadelphia," Vivian said. "I'm at the secondary location. Everything is intact." "Timeline?" "I need to accelerate. He found where I started. He'll find where I am. I don't know how long it takes him, but I have to assume faster than I planned." A pause. The sound of Patterson moving. Papers. A chair. "The Boston documentation is ready. I can have everything to you in 48 hours. I need it in 24. That's a different fee. I know. Do it." Another pause. "There's something you should know," Patterson said. Her voice had changed slightly. Not softer, just more careful. Vivian felt the skin on the back of her neck tighten. "Tell me." "I've been getting inquiries. Not directed at me specifically, but circulating in networks I pay attention to. Someone is running a search operation with significant resources. Photograph matching yours, distributed widely as of approximately 6 a.m. this morning. No stated reward yet, but the phrasing suggests one is coming." Vivian closed her eyes. "How wide?" she said. Wide enough that I'm mentioning it," Patterson said. "Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Pittsburgh. And that's only what I can see from where I sit." Vivian opened her eyes and looked at the brick wall outside her window. "Can it reach you?" she asked. "This number, this arrangement?" "No," Patterson said. "We're clean. But if you're visible at all, credit activity, cameras, anything, he's going to find you faster than the documentation gets there." "I understand." "Vivian?" Patterson used her name for the first time in the call. That alone was a signal. "If this man is as resourceful as you've indicated, and based on what I'm seeing, I believe you've actually underrepresented it, you may have a window of 18 to 24 hours before he has a physical location on you, not longer." Vivian's hand was steady on the phone. Her jaw was not. Then I'll need to not be here in 18 hours, she said. She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hands and thought about the reach of what she'd built her escape plan against. She'd known he was powerful. She'd watched that power operate up close for 3 years. She'd factored it in. She'd been careful. She was beginning to understand that careful wasn't the same thing as far enough. Dominic arrived in Philadelphia at 1 p.m. and immediately established a command point in a hotel suite in Center City that his people had booked under a corporate alias. He was not sleeping. His eyes were the color of flat water and had the particular quality of someone running entirely on will and adrenaline and something colder than either. Thatch had expanded the surveillance net. Philadelphia's camera infrastructure, both public and the private networks that Thatch had spent years quietly mapping and occasionally, quietly, accessing, was being run through facial recognition built off the photographs they had. The search radius was a mile in every direction from the Harrisburg Bus Depot's Philadelphia terminus. It was a significant operation. It cost a significant amount. Dominic had stopped thinking about cost approximately 14 hours ago. Marcus came in at 1:45 with his tablet and set it on the desk in front of Dominic. "We've got something," Marcus said. The image on the tablet was grainy. Security camera footage, timestamp reading 9:53 a.m., from a camera mounted on a corner building in West Philadelphia. A woman in a dark jacket with a backpack walking north. Her head was angled slightly down. You couldn't see her face cleanly, but Dominic knew the way she walked. He had spent 3 years in the same rooms with her. He knew the specific rhythm of her stride, slightly longer on the left, the subtle forward lean she carried from years of competitive swimming in her early 20s, the way she held her shoulders like she was always about to push through something. "It's her," he said. "We're running the block," Marcus said, "looking for what's in that direction. Hotels, hostels, anything that takes cash." "How long?" "Hour. Maybe less." Dominic stood up and went to the window. Philadelphia spread out below him, gray and intricate under the October overcast. Somewhere in that grid, his wife was sitting in a room she'd planned and paid for in advance, eating something inadequate and telling herself she was fine, that the plan was intact, that she'd thought of everything. She had thought of almost everything. She hadn't thought of the fact that he would recognize her walk from a grainy corner camera at 1/4 mile. He pressed his hand against the window glass. Same gesture as this morning, back at the estate. He noticed it, and it irritated him slightly. The repetition of it. The way it read as something he didn't have a name for. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was one he recognized. A man named Carver, who ran a significant operation out of South Philadelphia and who had been on Dominic's debt list. He answered. "I might have something," Carver said. "My guys spotted a woman this morning, matches the description you circulated. West Philly. She went into the Meridian Hostel on Walnut. Didn't come out while they were watching." "When was this?" "About 10 a.m. Dominic looked at his watch. It was 1:52 p.m. "She might still be there," Carver said. "Might have moved. Hard to say." "Keep eyes on it," Dominic said. "Nobody goes in. Nobody approaches her. I want to know immediately if she leaves." "Understood." A pause. "You want me to—" "Nobody goes near her, Carver." His voice went very flat. "This is my wife, not a target." Silence on the line. "Understood," Carver said again, differently this time. Dominic ended the call and turned to Marcus. "Meridian Hostel, Walnut Street." He was already moving toward the door. "Now," and Marcus, "Small. Just us and 2 others. No convoy, no spectacle. Civilian vehicles." Marcus was already on the phone. Vivian left the hostel at 2:15 p.m. Not because she knew they were coming. She left because staying still felt like surrender, and because Patterson's timeline of 18 to 20 hours had reset every instinct she had toward motion. She needed to get out of Philadelphia entirely. She had a contact in Wilmington, a woman who'd been part of a network that helped people in situations not entirely unlike hers, though usually not involving organized crime on quite this scale, who could house her for a few days while the Boston documentation came through. Wilmington was 90 minutes by train. She came out of the hostel's side entrance. She'd identified 2 exits when she checked in, same as the motel, and turned south. The street was ordinary. Foot traffic, a delivery truck double parked, music coming from somewhere above. She kept her pace moderate, not hurrying. Hurrying was visible. She was half a block south when a car pulled to the curb ahead of her. Black. Not an SUV, a plain sedan, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that was meant to look unremarkable and mostly succeeded. The rear door opened. The man who got out was not Dominic. He was one of Dominic's. She recognized the type, had seen a dozen of them over the years, 40s, solid, the kind of face that had been arranged by experience into a permanent state of neutral assessment. He held up both hands slightly, palms out, when he saw her register him. The universal gesture for "I am not going to grab you." "Mrs. Varela," he said, "my name is Marcus. I work for your husband. He's asked me to tell you that he just wants to talk." Vivian stopped. The sidewalk around her was ordinary. Foot traffic. A woman pushing a stroller, an elderly man with a canvas bag, the delivery truck. Normal city afternoon. She ran the geometry of the situation in approximately 3 seconds. Exits, distances, whether she could get to the corner before anyone in the car could close the gap. She could not. "Where is he?" she said. 30 seconds behind us," Marcus said. "He didn't want to be the first thing you saw. He thought you might run." "He was right," she said. Marcus almost smiled, not quite. "He said you'd say that too." The second car came around the corner and stopped behind the first. Dominic got out. He looked like he hadn't slept, because he hadn't. His jaw was dark with a day's growth, and his shirt was the second one since yesterday, and he walked toward her with the particular quality of a man who has been moving at controlled maximum velocity for 16 hours, and is now, for the first time, making himself slow down. He stopped 6 feet from her. They looked at each other. "You found me fast," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Gerald told me you were in Harrisburg," Dominic said. "You'd already left. The bus depot, Philadelphia. A camera caught your walk." "My walk." "The left side lean, the shoulders." His voice was flat, factual. "I know how you move." Something in her chest compressed. "I'm not going back," she said. "I know." That surprised her. She didn't let it show. "Then why are you here?" "Because you're carrying my child and I found out from a trash bin," he said. The flatness broke slightly on the last word. Not into anger, into something rawer and less controlled. "Because you've been planning this for months and you didn't tell me. Because whatever you're afraid of, you should have said it to my face." "I did," she said, 3 times. "You told me you were working on it." "I was." "You were always working on it, Dominic. It was always almost done. It was always one more deal, one more arrangement, one more month." Her voice came up. She held it down deliberately. "I stopped believing working on it meant anything." "I know." "Stop saying I know like that makes anything better." He took a half step forward. She didn't move back. Stubbornness, mostly, and the knowledge that if she started retreating, she wouldn't stop. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not softer exactly, more unguarded, like something behind the face had stopped defending itself. "Come somewhere we can talk," he said. "Not the estate. Not anything of mine. You pick the place. Public. Open. Wherever you feel safe. I'll leave Marcus and everyone else on the street. Just you and me." "And then what?" "And then I tell you something I was going to tell you last night. Before I found the note." She looked at him. 16 hours of running and 3 months of planning and the particular exhaustion that lived in her bones now. And still the specific, infuriating reality of him, standing on a sidewalk in Philadelphia with dark circles under his eyes, and her wedding rings presumably somewhere on his person, asking her to sit down with him. She had not planned for this part. She had planned for surveillance and pursuit and close calls. She had not planned for him to find her on a public street and say, "You pick the place," and look at her like that. "1 hour," she said. "Public place. You come alone?" "Yes." "If I see one of your people inside, you won't." She looked at him for another moment. "There's a diner on Chestnut, 2 blocks east. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She walked past him without touching him. Behind her, she heard him exhale. A long, slow breath, like something held too long, finally releasing. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to let him see what that sound did to her. Well, the diner was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years and would be there for 30 more. Formica countertops, swivel stools, laminated menus with photographs of things that looked better in the photograph. Vivian took a corner booth with sightlines to both the front door and the emergency exit in the back. She ordered coffee she didn't want from a server who didn't care what she wanted, and she sat with both hands wrapped around the mug and watched the door. Dominic came in alone. He sat across from her. He didn't order anything. He put his hands on the table, both of them, flat, the way someone sits when they're trying to demonstrate they're not holding anything. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. Not the full architecture of it, not the names and numbers and legal mechanisms, because that would have taken hours. But enough. 6 months of quiet arrangement, the dissolution of the empire through legitimate international channels, asset transfers into legal structures. The deal that had finalized, he paused here, on the same night she ran. She listened without speaking. When he finished, the diner noise continued around them as if the world hadn't just rearranged itself. Someone laughed at the counter. A cook's bell rang. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon sounds. "You were going to tell me last night," she said, "at the party, after the toast. I had it planned." "The party that I left before it started." "Yes." She looked at the coffee mug. "Show me." He reached into his inside jacket pocket and put a folded document on the table between them. She picked it up and read it. Her eyes moved slowly. She read it twice, the way he'd read her note. Not because it was unclear, but because the first read seemed too large to take in all at once. She set it down. "This is real," she said. Not a question. "As of 11:58 p.m. last night," he said. "It's done." The thing she felt was not what she expected to feel. It wasn't relief or vindication or the clean satisfaction of being right about what he was capable of. It was something messier, something that lived in the same neighborhood as grief, which made no sense and made complete sense at the same time. She had spent 4 months building an exit from a cage. The cage had been empty for less than 24 hours. "I want to be angry," she said. "You should be angry." "I am angry." She looked up at him. "I'm also—" She stopped. "I know," he said. "Stop saying that." "Vivian." The door of the diner opened. She registered it with her peripheral vision the way she'd been trained by 3 years of living in his world. A constant low-grade vigilance she hadn't even realized she'd absorbed. 2 men came in. Civilian clothes, but the way they moved through the entrance, the quick scan of the room, the practice casual that wasn't casual, made her stomach drop. They were not Dominic's. She knew Dominic's people the way she knew his walk. These were not his. Dominic had registered them a half-second after she had. She saw his expression change, not to panic, not to anything dramatic. Just a very precise recalibration, the face of a man shifting from one mode of being to another in the time it takes to blink. Under the table, his hand closed around her wrist. "Don't react," he said quietly. "Back exit. Stand up slowly." "Who are they?" "I don't know yet. Stand up." She stood up. He stood up. He kept his hand on her wrist, not gripping, just present, and steered her toward the back of the diner with his body between her and the 2 men, who had taken seats at the counter, but whose eyes tracked the movement. They made it to the hallway past the restrooms. They did not make it to the exit. The back door opened before they reached it, and a 3rd man stepped through, bigger than the first 2, not bothering with the civilian costume, with an expression that said he'd been placed there specifically for this. Dominic stopped. The man looked at him, then at Vivian, then back at him. "Mr. Caruso would like a conversation," the man said. Dominic's jaw tightened. Vivian felt it through the hand still on her wrist. Caruso. She'd heard that name exactly once, 2 years ago, in a conversation she'd walked into the tail end of and which Dominic had ended the moment he saw her in the doorway. She'd asked about it afterward. He'd said it was nothing. The way he'd said it had told her it was not nothing. "Not today," Dominic said to the man in the doorway. "Mr. Caruso said you'd say that." The man shrugged, not a friendly shrug. "He also said to tell you that the deal from last night changes the math. He has a different proposal." "Tell Caruso." "He's outside," the man said. "He drove up from Baltimore this morning. He says 5 minutes." Dominic was very still. Vivian could feel the calculus running through him. She'd learned to recognize it. the micro-stillness before a decision. Whatever Caruso was, whatever that name meant, the fact that he'd tracked them here, to Philadelphia, to this specific diner, meant the information network was moving faster than Dominic had calculated, which meant the dissolution of the empire had not been as quiet as he'd arranged, which meant there were people who knew the throne was empty and were already positioning around it. Dominic looked at Vivienne. His eyes asked her something she didn't fully have the language for. She nodded, very slightly. Handle it. He turned back to the man in the doorway. 5 minutes, Dominic said. She stays inside. Mr. Caruso doesn't have a problem with that, the man said. Dominic looked at Vivienne again. Don't move, he said, quietly. Not a command, a request. Please. She looked at him. 5 minutes, she said. He went through the door. She stood in the dim hallway between the restrooms and the exit and listened to the sounds of the diner in front of her and the sounds of the alley behind the door, and counted seconds and told herself she was not frightened and was absolutely frightened, not for herself this time, but for him, which was a very inconvenient thing to feel, given everything. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, she heard the first shot. It came from the alley, flat, percussive, real, in the way that movie gunfire never quite is. Then a second, then shouting, 2 voices, maybe 3. Then the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting pavement. She shoved the door open and went through it before the last echo. She hit the alley door at a dead run and almost went down on the wet asphalt. The alley was narrow. Brick on both sides, dumpsters against the left wall. A fire escape overhead that dripped something cold onto the pavement. The light was flat and gray and wrong. She registered all of it in the first half second, and then she registered Dominic. He was standing. That was the first thing. He was on his feet, which meant he wasn't the one who'd fallen. The heavy sound she'd heard, that was a man on the ground to her left, one of Caruso's, face down with his hands spread wide and not moving in the way that meant he'd been hit and hit hard. Dominic's right hand was at his side. His jacket was open. His eyes were on the far end of the alley where a black car was accelerating away, taillights bleeding red into the gray afternoon. 2 of Dominic's men, the ones who'd been on the street, the ones she hadn't seen come in, were bracketing the alley exit. One of them was on his phone. The other was watching the retreating car with the expression of someone doing arithmetic about whether to pursue. Dominic turned and saw her. The expression on his face cycled through several things in approximately 1 second. Relief first, then something that might have been anger at her for coming through the door, that he swallowed before it fully formed, then the flat, operational mask snapping back into place. I told you to stay inside, he said. I heard a shot. I handled it. She looked at the man on the ground. Is he alive? Dominic said. He'll have a headache for a week. He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and took her by the elbow. Not rough, but definite, and turned her back toward the door. We need to move. Now. This location is burned. What did Caruso want? Not here. Dominic. Vivienne. He pushed the door open and moved her through it, and didn't stop moving until they were through the diner and out the front entrance and into the street, where Marcus was already pulling a car to the curb with the particular urgency of a man who'd heard the shot and made his own calculations. Get in the car, please. She got in. He got in beside her. Marcus drove without being told where. The city moved past the windows. Dominic sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them and breathed for a moment. Just breathed. She watched him do it. The deliberate regulation of it, in through the nose, out slow, the method of a man who had learned to manage adrenaline the way other people managed their schedules. Caruso is Felix Caruso, he said. He ran the Baltimore operation for my father. When I took over, I restructured certain arrangements. He lost significant income and significant standing. He's been patient about it for 4 years. He paused. Apparently he stopped being patient when the news of the dissolution reached him. How did the news reach him? A silence. Not long. 3 seconds. But she'd learned to read his silences the way sailors read weather. Someone told him, Dominic said. Someone inside. Yes. She looked at his profile. You have a leak. I have a leak, he confirmed. His jaw was very tight. And Caruso knows the empire is dissolving, which means he knows there's a window. The structure that kept certain people from moving against me, the alliances, the mutual interests, those are dissolving with everything else. He wants to be positioned before the vacuum fills. What did he propose? In the alley. Dominic looked at her then. A direct look, the kind that didn't flinch from what it was showing. He wants to buy back in, Dominic said, at a fraction of the real value, and he wants to use you as leverage to make the price negotiable. The diner noise, the alley, the retreating taillights, all of it reorganized itself in her mind into a new shape. She'd thought the ambush was about Dominic. It had been about her. She was the variable that changed the math, the pregnant wife who'd run, who Dominic had chased across 2 states in 16 hours. That information, in the right hands, told a very specific story about where Dominic's pressure points were. He followed you to me, she said. He followed the search operation to you, yes. His voice was careful. I moved too visibly, too many people activated, too broad a net. I underestimated how much attention it would draw. She sat with that. So my location is compromised, she said. Not just to you, to Caruso. To anyone watching the search. He looked forward again. I'm sorry, Yes, I'm sorry. She hadn't heard him apologize before. Not like that. Not with the words sitting that flat and honest in the air, without anything around it to soften the shape of it. She looked out the window. Where are we going? She said. Safe house, Marcus said from the front. Germantown. We have it for 48 hours. She didn't argue. Arguing required energy. She was already redistributing toward the specific kind of cold clarity that had gotten her through the past 18 hours, and she needed all of it now. Because the plan she'd built so carefully over 4 months had just sustained damage she hadn't engineered it to absorb. The safe house was a narrow row house on a quiet block, the kind of street where people minded their business out of long habit. They went in through the back. The interior was sparse, functional furniture, covered windows, a kitchen stocked with the basics. Someone had been here recently. The coffee maker was warm. Marcus set himself up at the front window. The 2 other men took positions outside. Dominic and Vivian sat at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the table. Tell me everything about the leak, she said. He looked at her. That's not, tell me. Her voice was not loud. It was the particular quiet of someone who has run out of room to be anything other than direct. Because if someone inside your operation sold you out to Caruso, and Caruso now knows where I am and that I'm the thing you'll chase across state lines, then this is not over. This is starting, and I need to understand what I'm inside of. A long moment. He considered she could see it. The old reflex of compartmentalization, of keeping her separate from the operational reality, which had been part of what broke them. She watched him recognize it and set it aside. 3 people knew the full scope of the dissolution, he said. Thatch, my attorney, Brennan, and a man named Cole who handled the international transfers, he paused. And Marcus. Marcus's voice came from the front window without him turning around. It wasn't me. I know, Dominic said. He didn't say it like reassurance. He said it like a fact he'd already verified. So 3 suspects, Vivian said. Thatch has been with me for 12 years. Brennan has too much to lose. His entire legitimate practice is built on my referrals, and he knows what happens to people who cross me. He stopped. Cole is newer, 8 months. His references were vetted, but vetting has gaps. Where's Cole now? New York. At least, that's where he was as of yesterday morning. She looked at him. Have you called him? Not yet. I wanted to find you first. He said it plainly, without apology this time. Just the statement of what his priorities had been, offered without decoration. She processed that. It landed somewhere complicated. Call him now, she said. Dominic pulled out his phone. He found the number and put the call on speaker and set the phone on the table between them. It rang 4 times, then a voicemail. Generic. No name. He ended the call and looked at the phone. He's not answering, Vivian said. No. That's an answer. Yes, he said. It is. The silence in the kitchen had a specific texture now. She watched his face move through the recognition of it. Cole, who he'd brought in 8 months ago, who'd had access to the full dissolution architecture, who was now not answering his phone the morning after Felix Caruso had shown up in a Philadelphia alley armed with information he shouldn't have had. She'd watched Dominic handle betrayal before, from a distance, behind closed doors, in the aftermath rather than the moment. She'd seen the results of it, the particular efficiency with which problems were addressed, the way his world closed around a wound and sealed it. She'd never sat across from him while the betrayal was still registering. His face, for about 4 seconds, was something she didn't have a name for. Not rage. Rage was too simple. Something with more layers. The specific quality of a man who had trusted carefully and been betrayed anyway, and was now calculating the exact cost of that trust in real time. Then it smoothed out. "All right," he said. "Just that." "All right." The word that meant the internal architecture had restructured around the new information, and he was already moving forward. She thought she understood, for the first time, why people feared him. Thatch arrived at the safe house at 4 p.m. He was a small man, compact, with the kind of eyes that moved constantly and recorded everything. He'd driven from New York in under 2 hours, which meant he'd exceeded the speed limit significantly and consistently. He came in through the back and acknowledged Vivian with a nod that managed to be neither surprised nor pointed, and then he opened his laptop on the kitchen table and started talking. "Cole's phone went dark at 8 a.m. this morning," Thatch said. "Last ping was in Jersey City. He made 3 calls last night between 11 p.m. and midnight, all to a relay number that traces back to a shell I've seen used by Caruso's people before." Dominic sat with his hands flat on the table. What did he have access to? Full dissolution documentation. The international transfer accounts, not the access credentials, but the account structures. The names of the 3 European entities we used as receiving vehicles. Thatch paused. "And your personal security detail rotation for the past month. Who was where? When?" The room was quiet. Vivian understood what that last piece meant. Cole hadn't just sold the financial information. He'd sold the security architecture, which meant Caruso didn't just know where Dominic was vulnerable financially. He knew where his people were, what the coverage gaps looked like, when and where a man might be exposed. "He's been working for Caruso for how long?" Dominic said. "Based on the call pattern, at minimum 6 months, possibly since he was hired." 8 months. Cole had been inside the operation for 8 months, 2 months of genuine work, or the appearance of it. 6 months of feeding Caruso everything. "The anniversary party," Dominic said. His voice had gone very flat. "The guest list. The security positioning." "He would have had all of it," Thatch said. Dominic stood up slowly. He walked to the window over the kitchen sink and stood with his back to the room. She watched the line of his shoulders. She'd seen that posture before, not often, but enough to know what it meant. He was containing something that, uncontained, would be considerable. She spoke before she'd decided to. "Caruso was never going to negotiate," she said. Both men looked at her. "In the alley," she said. "He sent 3 men into a diner to pull Dominic outside. That's not how you set up a negotiation. That's how you set up a grab." She looked at Dominic's back. He wasn't there to propose a deal. He was there to take one of us. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Dominic turned around. "She's right," Marcus said from the front room. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I've been thinking about the positioning since we left the diner. 2 men in the front to box the exit, 1 man on the back door. That's containment. If they just wanted a conversation, they put 1 man at the table." Dominic looked at Vivian. She held the look. "He wanted leverage," she said. "Either me or you. Whoever was easier to take. And now he knows where we are." "He doesn't know this address," Thatch said. "He knows Philadelphia," she said. "He knows you're running a search operation. He knows Dominic drove here personally. How long before he finds this block?" She looked at Thatch directly. "Based on what Cole gave him. How long?" Thatch's expression shifted slightly. He calculated visibly. "If Cole gave him the methodology we use for safe house selection, the criteria, the neighborhoods we prefer," he stopped. "Possibly by tonight." Dominic said nothing. She looked at him. "We have to move again." "I know. And we can't use your network to do it, because we don't know how deep Cole's access went. We don't know who else he might have." "I know," Dominic said again, sharper this time, not at her, at the situation. She registered that. The way the anger moved through him and found no landing place and came back to rest behind his eyes as something controlled and cold and pointed entirely inward. I need Patterson, she said. Who? She hadn't told him about Patterson. It hadn't seemed relevant 40 minutes ago, when the world had a different shape. A lawyer. She's been handling the documentation for my new identity. She has resources, different networks than yours, completely separate. She can route us somewhere Caruso isn't looking. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. She watched him process it. The fact that Vivian's escape infrastructure, built against him, was now potentially the cleanest path available to both of them. The irony of it didn't make him smile. It made his jaw tighten in that specific way that meant he was doing the thing she'd always respected most about him, setting his ego aside when the situation required it. Call her, he said. Vivian pulled out the burner phone. Patterson answered before the second ring. You're not calling on schedule, she said immediately. What's wrong? The situation has changed significantly, Vivian said. I need to move tonight. 2 people, not 1. And I need a route that doesn't intersect with any network connected to the name Varela. A long pause. 2 people, Patterson said carefully. Yes. The second person being. Vivian looked at Dominic across the table. He looked back at her. The kitchen light was yellow and inadequate, and the sounds of the street came through the walls, and somewhere in the middle distance a siren moved through the neighborhood on its way to someone else's emergency. My husband, Vivian said. Another pause. Longer. I see, Patterson said. Her voice had gone to the very careful register. This is a significant departure from the original arrangement. I'm aware. It changes the risk profile considerably. I know what it changes. Can you do it? The sound of Patterson thinking was the absence of sound. Then, I need 2 hours. Don't use any cards. Don't move on foot for more than a block. Stay off your previous routes. I'll call this number when I have something. 2 hours, Vivian said. And Vivian, a pause. Whatever has changed, make sure you've thought through what you're committing to. Once I move 2 people, the original documentation I built for 1 is voided. There's no clean separation after this. The line between them held for a moment. I understand, Vivian said. She ended the call. She set the phone on the table. She did not look at Dominic immediately. She looked at her own hands instead, the bare fingers where the rings had been, the slight roughness at the knuckle of her left index finger that had been there since she was 19 and had never quite gone away. You just burned your exit, Dominic said. Not triumphant, not soft, just stating the fact of it. I burned one version of it, she said. She looked up. We have 2 hours. There are things I need to say to you before Patterson calls back and we stop having time. Then say them. She took a breath. What followed was not a conversation she'd rehearsed, because she'd never imagined it. She told him what 3 years had actually felt like from inside. Not the gilded surface of it, not the things she'd managed to say in smaller arguments over smaller things, but the real accumulation of it, the way she'd watched herself narrow, the way the fear had become ambient, just weather she lived inside, the way she'd looked at him sometimes, and seen a man she loved completely and knew with equal completeness that loving him was making her less of herself. He listened without interrupting. That, in itself, was not what she'd expected. He sat with his hands on the table and he listened with the same total attention he brought to operational problems, and his face did the thing it did. That unguarded thing, the one she'd seen in the alley and at the diner and now here, where the armor was simply absent. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said, about all of it. She'd expected defense. She'd expected the negotiation she'd had with him in smaller forms over the years. The explanations, the justifications, the architecture of reasons that always made sense individually and accumulated into a wall. She hadn't prepared for your right about all of it. I knew what I was asking you to live inside, he said. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself you were strong enough. Both of those things were... He stopped. They were convenient for me. They let me keep building what I'd been building since I was 23 years old, and I didn't want to stop. He looked at the table. The dissolution. I started it because of you, because I watched you at a party 18 months ago talking to a woman you'd just met, and you were laughing, genuinely laughing, and I realized I hadn't seen you laugh like that in my presence in 6 months, and I understood what that meant. She sat with that. You started it 18 months ago, she said. The planning? Yes. The execution took time. He looked up. I should have told you I was starting it. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you'd think it was another promise. He paused. I was probably right to be afraid of that. Yes, she said. You were. He nodded, accepted it. She looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to in the diner, the way she'd been specifically avoiding since the moment she'd walked out of the estate with the blue dress on and her rings on the pillow, the exhaustion on his face, the dark circles, the specific quality of a man who had spent 16 hours moving at maximum capacity, not to reclaim property, but to find the person he couldn't function as himself without. She had planned for everything. She had not planned for the moment she understood that the most frightening thing about Dominic Varela was not his power. It was that he was telling the truth, and she believed him. The burner phone rang. Patterson's number. She picked it up. That was fast. Change of plan, Patterson said. Her voice had a quality Vivian hadn't heard in it before. Something tight. I need you to listen carefully and not react visibly if you're not alone. Vivian's hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Dominic read her face and went still. I'm listening, Vivian said. I've been contacted, Patterson said. In the past 30 minutes, someone reached out through a channel that should not have had access to my operations. They identified you by name, identified your husband by name, and indicated they know you've been in contact with me. They didn't make an explicit threat. They didn't need to. The kitchen was very quiet. Caruso, Vivian said. I don't know the name. The contact was made through an intermediary. But whoever it is, they have reach I did not anticipate. A pause. Vivian, my operation is compromised. I can't safely complete the documentation. More importantly, I can't provide you with a clean route out. If they found me, they can follow anything I set up. She felt the floor shift beneath her. 4 months of planning. Every layer. Gerald, the storage unit, the Margaret Ellis identity, Patterson, the Boston documentation, the Wilmington contact, the entire architecture she'd built so carefully against every contingency she could imagine. Caruso had found the attorney who was supposed to be invisible. Cole had given him enough to unravel everything. What do I do? She said. Her voice came out. What do I do? She said. Patterson's answer came without hesitation, which meant she'd already thought it through. You stop trusting any infrastructure connected to me. You stop trusting any route I built, and you make whatever decisions you need to make with only the people in the room with you right now. A pause, tight and final. I'm sorry. I built clean. I don't know how they found me. I know you did, Vivian said. Be careful. The line went dead. She set the phone on the table. The kitchen was very quiet. Dominic was watching her face with the specific attention of a man reading a situation through someone else's expression, and what he read there made him straighten slightly in his chair. Patterson's compromised, she said. Caruso reached her through a channel that shouldn't have existed. Everything I built, every layer of it, he has enough to unravel it. She looked at Dominic directly. Cole didn't just sell you, he sold me. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes restructuring. Dominic looked at Thatch in the doorway. Thatch was already on his laptop, fingers moving. Marcus had come fully into the kitchen now, standing with his arms at his sides and his face arranged into the expression of a man awaiting orders. How long have we been at this address? Dominic said. 3 hours and change, Marcus said. Caruso knows we're in Philadelphia. He knows our safe house methodology through Cole. He has Patterson's network compromised, which means he's been running a parallel operation since at least this morning. Dominic stood. We have maybe an hour before someone is standing outside this building. Less, Thatch said without looking up. I'm seeing vehicle movement in the surrounding blocks. 3 black SUVs in a 2-block radius. They're not moving like lost tourists. Vivienne was already on her feet. The calculation was simple and terrible. Every exit she'd built was gone. Every route Dominic's network could provide was potentially compromised through Cole. They were in a row house in Germantown with 1 man on the door, 2 outside, Thatch, Marcus, and a window of perhaps 40 minutes before Caruso's people had the building bracketed completely. She had nothing, and then she thought of something. Gerald, she said. Dominic looked at her. Gerald Fountain. He drove me out last night. He's not connected to you. He came through Constance, through a chain that has nothing to do with your network or Patterson's. Caruso can't have him because Cole didn't know he existed. She was already picking up the burner phone. He owes Constance. Constance will answer for me. You want to call a car service driver, Marcus said. I want to call the one person in this situation whose name isn't in any file Cole ever touched, she said. She looked at Marcus steadily. Do you have a better option? Marcus looked at Dominic. Dominic said, Call him. What? Constance answered on the third ring. Vivian gave her 30 seconds of information, stripped to the essential, no explanation, no context. And Constance, who had known Vivian for 11 years and had the specific quality of a woman who assessed situations quickly and didn't perform alarm, said she'd call Gerald and call back in 5 minutes. She called back in 4. Gerald would come. He was 20 minutes out. He knew a route south that avoided the interstate. Back roads, slower, less visible. 20 minutes. Thatch looked up from the laptop. 2 of the SUVs have stopped. 1 block north, 1 block east. They're positioning. They're not moving in yet, Marcus said. They're waiting for the third vehicle to complete the bracket, Thatch said. When it does, they'll have all 4 sides. Where's the third vehicle? Dominic said. South, still moving. Thatch's fingers ran across the keyboard. ETA to position, 12 minutes. Maybe 15. 20 minutes for Gerald, 15 for the bracket to close. Vivian did the math without speaking. Dominic did it simultaneously. She could see it in his face. The same calculation, arriving at the same answer. He looked at Marcus. We go in 8 minutes, Dominic said, before the south vehicle is in position. We hit that gap while it exists. 2 cars, Marcus said. Take separate routes. Converge. 1 car, Dominic said. We stay together. Marcus opened his mouth. Together, Marcus. Marcus closed his mouth and went to tell the men outside. Thatch began shutting down the laptop, wiping the session, the methodical erasure of their presence from the house. Vivian watched him work and thought about Patterson's voice on the phone, the tight, careful quality of a woman who had built a clean operation and found it wasn't clean enough, and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. She had spent 4 months building an exit from Dominic's world. She was going to escape it in a car arranged by a man Dominic had found and brought to heel, running from an enemy who had compromised every careful plan she'd made, using a driver she'd hired to run from her husband. The shape of it would have been funny if she'd had any room left for humor. She didn't. She picked up the backpack and checked it by feel. Cash, IDs, phone, and slung it over one shoulder. She looked around the kitchen once, the table with the 2 mugs, the yellow light, the window with the covered glass. She thought about all the safe houses she would never see, all the routes that no longer existed, all the careful layering that had dissolved in the space of 3 hours. Dominic appeared beside her. Ready, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. They went out the back. The alley behind the row house was clear, cold. Temperature had dropped in the past hour, the kind of October cold that arrives without announcement and settles in the bones. Marcus took point, moving fast along the alley wall. Dominic kept himself between Vivian and the open end of the alley without making it look deliberate. She noticed it and said nothing and matched his pace. They came out on a cross street 2 blocks south of the safe house. A plain sedan, different from the vehicles they'd arrived in, plates Thatch had arranged, waited at the curb with the engine running. Not Gerald. One of Marcus's people, a woman named Soto, who drove with the focused economy of someone trained for exactly this situation. They got in, Marcus in front, Dominic and Vivian in the back. Thatch came out 30 seconds later and folded into the passenger seat, laptop bag across his chest. Soto drove without being told where. She had the route. The first 2 blocks were clean. Vivian watched the cross streets and counted seconds and held her breathing deliberate and even. Dominic sat close enough that she could feel the warmth off him through 2 layers of jacket. Neither of them spoke. At the 3rd block, a black SUV pulled out of a side street ahead. Not fast, not aggressive. It simply appeared in the road ahead and matched their speed, which was the more frightening thing. Aggressive would have meant panic. Matching their speed meant coordination. We have company, Soto said. Her voice was entirely level. I see it, Marcus said. Another one, Thatch said. He was watching the side mirror. Coming up on the left. Half a block. Soto's hands adjusted on the wheel. Vivian felt the slight shift in the car's weight as Soto moved her foot. Options, Marcus said. 3rd Street goes under the rail bridge, Soto said. Tight. They won't be able to run parallel. Take it. She took it. A hard left that pressed Vivian into Dominic's shoulder, and then they were on 3rd, and the road narrowed and the rail bridge came up fast and dirty, concrete pillars on both sides, and the SUV behind them had to fall back because the lane didn't accommodate it. 20 seconds of breathing room. They came out the other side and Soto immediately took a right, and then another left. And then they were in a different residential grid, smaller streets, parked cars on both sides, and for a moment the mirrors were clean. Gerald? Vivian said. 14 minutes, Dominic said. He had his own phone now, tracking the coordination. He's coming south on Cheltenham. We need to get to the exchange point. Where? Soto said. Dominic gave her an address. A parking structure 2 miles east, public, multi-level, the kind of place where a car could pass between 2 people without being clearly visible from street level. Thatch had identified it in the 6 minutes they'd had while Constance was calling Gerald back. They drove. The next 8 minutes had the specific quality of held breath, not silence, because Thatch was on his laptop routing them through camera light corridors, and Marcus was on comms with the 2 men they'd left behind. But the held breath quality of a situation balanced on its edge, where the difference between clean and catastrophic was a single wrong turn or a single vehicle appearing from the wrong direction. They made the parking structure. Gerald was already there, 3rd level, northwest corner, engine idling. He got out when he saw them. He looked at Dominic. He looked at Vivian. He looked at Dominic again with the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of the current situation. Different arrangement than we discussed, he said to Vivian. I know, she said. He's coming. Yes. Gerald looked at Dominic for a long moment. Dominic held it without flinching. Something passed between them. The specific assessment 2 men perform when they've been on opposite sides of the same situation and now must determine whether they can occupy the same direction. I drive, Gerald said finally. My routes, my decisions, nobody overrules me on the road. Agreed, Dominic said immediately. Gerald nodded once. Then get in. They were 40 minutes south of Philadelphia, on a state route that ran through flat agricultural land, when Thatch's laptop chimed. Everyone in the car registered it. Thatch's posture changed, a specific stiffening that Vivian had learned to read as the signal for unwelcome information. Talk, Dominic said. Cole surfaced, Thatch said, 40 minutes ago in Jersey City. My system flagged a facial match on a transit camera. He paused. He was with 2 men. One of them is Caruso's enforcer. I have him on a 2019 file, a situation in Baltimore that I tracked for contingency purposes. And, Dominic said, he knew from Thatch's voice that the and existed. They weren't going toward Caruso's Baltimore operation. They were going north. Thatch looked up from the screen. His eyes went to Dominic with an expression she hadn't seen on Thatch before, something close to reluctance. I ran the transit data forward. Best estimate of trajectory puts them on a route toward the estate. The estate. Westchester. Where the anniversary gala had been 40 hours ago, where the rings were still on the pillow, and the blue dress was on a chair in a motel in Harrisburg, where Dominic's remaining staff were operating under the assumption that the primary threats were external and visible, and not being led through the front door by a man who'd had 8 months of interior access. Who's at the estate? Vivian said. Skeleton crew, Marcus said from the front. His voice was tight. 8 people, mostly household. 8 people who had not signed up for what Cole was apparently walking toward them. Dominic pulled out his phone. I need to reach the estate, he said. Lockdown protocol. Evacuate non-essential. Dominic! Thatch's voice stopped him. Another pause, the reluctant kind. If Cole's been inside for 8 months, he knows the lockdown protocols. He built half of them. The phone sat in Dominic's hand. Vivian watched his face run through it. The lockdown codes, the security camera positions, the staff schedules, the access override sequences that Cole had handled as part of his administrative role. 8 months of access that had seemed like an asset and had been a key cut for every door in the building. Can we reach them another way? She said. Directly, not through the security system. Elena, Dominic said immediately. His head of household. He found her number and called it on a phone that had no connection to his security infrastructure. His personal line, a number Cole would have had no reason to document. It rang and rang and rang. He ended the call. He tried another number. One of the household staff. Same result. He tried a third. On the fourth ring, a woman's voice answered. Young, slightly breathless. One of the kitchen staff, Vivian thought. She recognized the voice without being able to attach a face to it immediately. Mr. Varela. The woman's voice was very low, as if she was trying not to be heard by something in the same room. There are men here. They came in 20 minutes ago. They said they were from your office. Elena let them in because one of them had an access card and the security panel accepted it. The car was very quiet. Where are you? Dominic said. His voice had gone to a register she'd never heard before. Not loud, not hard. Very controlled in the specific way of someone managing the impulse to be loud and hard and allowing none of it out. The pantry, off the kitchen. I locked myself in when I heard Elena arguing with them. How many men? 4, maybe 5. I couldn't see all of them. Is Elena all right? A pause that lasted slightly too long. I don't know. Dominic's hand tightened on the phone. Vivian watched his knuckles go pale. Stay where you are, he said. Do not open the door. Do not make noise. I'm going to give you a number. You call it in 10 minutes if you haven't heard from me, and the man who answers will get you out. Do you understand? Yes. He gave her Marcus's number and ended the call. He looked forward through the windshield at the flat autumn landscape running past the windows. Gerald, he said, how long to New York from here? Depending on traffic, hour 40, hour 50, Gerald said. Take the fastest route. Dominic, Marcus turned in the passenger seat. If Caruso has 5 men in the estate and Cole is en route with more, going in is, I have 8 people in that building, Dominic said. Household staff. They are not combatants. They are there because of me. He paused. I'm going. We don't have enough people to... Marcus? The word cut clean. I'm going. Vivian looked at his profile, the jaw, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of a decision that has already been fully made and is simply waiting for the world to catch up with it. She thought about 8 household staff, about Elena, who had worked in that building for 11 years, and who had let men in because the security panel accepted their card, because the security panel had been built by a man who had been feeding information to their enemy for 6 months. About the young woman locked in a pantry speaking in a low voice so she wouldn't be heard. She thought about the child she was carrying and the vineyard in Tuscany that existed on a document she'd read in a Philadelphia diner, and the version of the future where she sat on a terrace above rolling hills, and none of this had happened. She thought about what it meant that she had come through the back door of a diner without hesitating when she heard a shot. I'm going too, she said. No, Dominic said immediately. Those are your people in there because of your life. I've been living that life for 3 years. Those aren't strangers to me, she looked at him directly. And I'm not sitting in a car somewhere while you're pregnant. I know what I am. Her voice was very steady. I also know who I am, and I'm not the woman who waits in the car. He looked at her. The argument was in his eyes. The fear for her, the instinct to contain and protect that had been, she understood now, both the thing that had caged her and the thing that was entirely genuine. Both true simultaneously. That was the thing about him she'd never been able to simplify. You stay with Gerald, he said finally. In the car, outside the perimeter. She considered it. It was not what she'd said. It was a compromise offered by a man who had just watched his wife burn her escape route and call her driver and choose to go toward danger rather than away from it, and who was trying to find the shape of a world where he could protect her without caging her. Outside the perimeter, she said. But I stay with communications. I need to know what's happening. Yes. And if the perimeter isn't safe, Gerald moves immediately. No argument. He looked at Gerald in the mirror. Understood, Gerald said. She nodded. Gerald drove faster. The autumn landscape gave way to the sprawl of the outer suburbs, the familiar geography of the approach to New York taking shape through the windshield. Thatch was running coordinates, mapping what they knew of Caruso's positioning. Marcus was on the phone with two men he trusted who could meet them at the estate's perimeter within 40 minutes. The numbers were not good. The resources they had versus the resources apparently already inside the building. And everyone in the car knew it, and no one said it aloud because saying it aloud served no function. Vivienne watched the road and kept her hand resting on her stomach and thought about the note she'd left on a pillow 40 hours ago, and the rings beside it, and the test in the trash, and the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this car on this road going toward the last place she'd ever imagined going willingly. Thatch's laptop chimed again. She didn't like the sound of that chime. She'd learned it in the past 6 hours, and it never carried good news. "Caruso," Thatch said. "He's not in Philadelphia anymore." He looked up. His eyes found Dominic's in the rear-view mirror. "He's ahead of us." The words landed in the car like something physical. "How far ahead?" Dominic said. "At current trajectory." Thatch checked. "He's going to reach the estate 20 minutes before we do." Gerald's foot was already pressing harder against the accelerator. The engine note shifted upward. 20 minutes. 5 men already inside the estate. Caruso arriving with whatever additional force he'd assembled. 8 household staff and a young woman locked in a pantry. And the most dangerous man Vivienne had ever known sitting 2 feet to her left, running the math on a situation that the math did not currently favor. She watched his face. She watched him make the decision she could already see forming behind his eyes. The decision that lived past strategy and calculation, in the territory where men did things that the rational accounting of risk would never authorize, because some things existed outside that accounting entirely. He looked at her. "Whatever happens when we get there," he said, "I need you to know something." "Tell me after," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Tell me when it's done." Something moved across his face. Not agreement, exactly. The recognition of what she meant, that after was a thing she was declaring real by naming it, that she was choosing to believe in it. "After," he said. Gerald took the on-ramp at a speed that pushed them both sideways, and the New York skyline emerged through the windshield like a blade catching light, and somewhere ahead of them, in a house full of people who had nothing to do with the war being conducted inside. Gerald killed the headlights 2 blocks from the estate. The Westchester night was cold and very dark, the kind of October dark that exists between streetlights, and the estate gates were visible from the end of the service road as a shape against deeper dark. Closed, which meant whoever was inside had secured the perimeter. Not to keep people out, to keep people in. "Stop here," Dominic said. Gerald stopped. Dominic was out of the car before it fully settled. Marcus came out of the passenger seat simultaneously, the two of them moving with the coordinated efficiency of men who had operated together long enough to share instincts. 2 additional vehicles were already positioned on the parallel street, the men Marcus had called en route, 4 of them waiting in the dark with the engine off. Vivienne got out. Dominic turned. "We agreed." "I'm not going in," she said. "I'm standing here. There's a difference." She looked at him steadily. "Go." He held the look for 2 seconds. Then he turned and moved. She stood beside Gerald's car and watched them go. 6 men dissolving into the darkness between the road and the estate wall, moving low and fast and quiet, and the night absorbing them the way water absorbs something dropped into it. No sound, no wasted motion, just the dark, and then the absence of them in it. Gerald came around the car and stood beside her without being asked. "You're not going to stay by the car, are you?" he said. "I said I'd stay outside the perimeter," she said. "I didn't define the perimeter." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough," he said. But the east wall had a maintenance access point that Cole's files did not contain, because it predated the security system Cole had administered by 11 years and had been sealed, apparently sealed, since a waterline repair in the early years of Dominic's ownership. Marcus knew it existed because Marcus had been there for the waterline repair. It took him 40 seconds to open it with a tool he'd carried for exactly this kind of contingency, which said something about Marcus that Vivienne had never fully appreciated until this moment. They went through in pairs. The estate grounds at night were their own geography. The shapes of hedges and outbuildings she'd walked past 1,000 times in daylight transformed into something unfamiliar and slightly hostile. The familiar made strange by darkness and the knowledge of what was inside the main house. The anniversary tents were still standing on the south lawn, the caterer's crew not yet returned. White shapes in the dark. Vivian had spent 3 years trying to leave this place, and now she was moving toward it through wet grass in October cold, and the specific absurdity of that was not lost on her. It simply wasn't relevant. She and Gerald moved along the tree line, 50 yards behind the main group. She had told Dominic she would stay outside the perimeter. She had not promised anything about the perimeter's location. Light was on in the main house, most of it, which was wrong. The estate ran on a timed system that dimmed unoccupied rooms automatically. Full lights meant someone had overridden the system, Caruso's people, making the space theirs, not thinking about what full lights at 11 p.m. communicated to anyone watching from the grounds. The first sound came from the east side of the house, not a shot. Something harder to categorize. A crash, like furniture relocated with force, and then a voice raised briefly and cut off. The cutoff was the part that tightened Vivian's chest. She kept moving. What happened in the next 11 minutes she would later be able to reconstruct only in fragments, because she did not see most of it directly, and because the fragments that reached her through the darkness arrived out of order and without context. She heard 2 shots from the north side of the house, close together. She heard Marcus's voice saying something clipped and operational that she couldn't make out. She saw light move behind a second-floor window in a way that suggested the room's occupants were moving fast. She and Gerald had reached the kitchen entrance on the east side, the same delivery door she'd walked out of 41 hours ago in a blue dress with her rings in her pocket and her entire plan intact. She stood at it and put her hand on the handle. Gerald put his hand over hers, not stopping her, just present. She pushed through. The kitchen was empty. The lights were on, all of them, harsh and overhead, and there were signs of disruption. A chair turned over, a mug on the floor in pieces, a drawer pulled open and left, but no one present. She moved through quickly, checking the pantry door as she passed it. She knocked twice, low. A pattern she didn't have, so she just said, "It's Vivian Varela. You can open the door." A long pause, then the sound of a lock turning. The young woman who came out was named Rosa. Vivian placed her now. 22, 3 months on staff, had a gap in her front teeth and laughed easily when she laughed. She did not look like she was going to laugh anytime soon. Her eyes were very wide, and she was shaking in the particular full-body way of someone who has been holding still out of fear for a long time, and has now been given permission to move. "Where are they?" Vivian said. "Main hall," Rosa said. Her voice was barely audible. "They put everyone in the main hall, Elena and the others. They've been there since they came in." "How many staff?" "6. Elena and 5 others. I slipped out through the back hall when they weren't watching the kitchen corridor." She swallowed. "Is Mr. Varela here?" "Yes," Vivian said. "He's here." Something in Rosa's face realigned. Vivian noted it. The specific quality of relief that came from trusting that a particular person's presence changed the odds. She had felt that herself. She understood, in this moment and not for the first time, that this was not a simple thing. The fact that it complicated everything did not make it less real. "Stay here," Vivian said. "Don't go into the hall. When it's quiet, when it's been quiet for 2 full minutes, you go out the kitchen door and you go to the service road and you keep going. There's a car there. A man named Gerald will take you wherever you need to go." Rosa nodded. Her hands were still shaking. Vivian moved toward the main hall. She heard Dominic's voice before she saw him. She heard Caruso's voice first. Actually, a man in his late 50s with a Baltimore accent she could now attach to a face, heavy-set, silver-haired, the kind of man who had operated in certain worlds long enough to develop the specific confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. He was not, currently, the most dangerous person in this room. He appeared to understand that, which was why his voice had the particular quality of a man negotiating from a position he knew was weakening. She came to the doorway of the main hall and stopped. The room had been the site of the anniversary party 2 nights ago. The flowers were still there, wilting now, the orchids beginning to drop petals, the candle holders dark. The tables had been pushed to the sides. 6 of Dominic's household staff stood against the far wall. Elena among them, white-faced and rigid with a dignity that was either bravery or shock, possibly both. 2 of Caruso's men had been positioned to watch them, And those two men were now themselves watched by two of Dominic's people who had come through the front. The math in the room had shifted. Caruso stood in the center of the space. Dominic stood 12 feet from him. Between them, on the floor, one of Caruso's men, not moving, and Cole, sitting with his back against a table leg and his hands pressed to his side, alive but very much aware of the specific costs of his decisions over the past 8 months. He was not looking at anyone. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man reviewing a very long list of mistakes. Dominic had a cut above his left eye that was bleeding down his temple. He hadn't wiped it. He was looking at Caruso with the flat total attention of a man who has run out of the patience required for anything other than conclusions. "This ends tonight," Dominic said. "All of it." 4 years, Caruso said. His voice had something in it. Not quite grief, not quite rage. The specific bitterness of a man who had built something and watched it be restructured around him. "Your father built something that was supposed to be inherited, not sold off to Europeans through a lawyer in Geneva." "My father is not here," Dominic said. "No, he's not." Caruso looked at him. "He would have handled this differently." "I know," Dominic said. "That's not a point in his favor." The two remaining Caruso men, one by the east window, one near the hallway entrance she'd come through, were calculating. She could see it. The room's arithmetic had been rewritten in the past few minutes, and they were running the new numbers and arriving at conclusions that were not encouraging for their position. One of Marcus's men was visible in the hallway. Another was at the window. They were contained, and they knew it. Caruso knew it too. "The dissolution doesn't hold," Caruso said. "You know that. You think walking away works in this life. There are people connected to your name who won't accept a letter from a Geneva lawyer telling them the arrangement is over." "Those people will be managed," Dominic said. "By who? You're leaving." "By men who are better positioned than you to manage them." Dominic's voice was entirely steady. "You were never that man, Felix. Not under my father, and not now." Something moved across Caruso's face. The old wound of it, the standing he'd lost, the income, the position, and underneath all of that, the specific injury of a man who had believed himself to be in the line of succession and found himself written out. "You brought her into this," Caruso said. His eyes moved and found Vivian in the doorway. She didn't move. Dominic's head turned. He saw her. A flicker of something. Not anger, past anger, into something more complicated. And then he turned back to Caruso. "She was never part of any negotiation," Dominic said. His voice had changed, not louder, denser. "Say her name again and this conversation is over." Caruso looked at Vivienne for a moment. She held it. She did not step back into the corridor, and she did not look away, and she did not perform calm she didn't entirely feel. She just stood in the doorway of a room full of wilting anniversary flowers and let him look, because she understood, had understood since the alley in Philadelphia, that being invisible in this world had cost she was no longer willing to pay. Caruso looked back at Dominic, and the calculation she'd watched running behind his eyes for the past minute finally completed. She could see it happen, the moment a man accepts the room's arithmetic. He was 61 years old, and he had made his run, and it had not come out the way he'd planned, and the men around him were watching for his next move, and had positioned themselves to contain whatever it was. "Your father," Caruso said, "would be ashamed." "My father," Dominic said, "died angry and alone, and never knew a single day of peace after he turned 40. I don't take instruction from what he would have thought." Caruso said nothing. "Walk out," Dominic said. "Your men come with you. Cole stays." A pause. "You come near my family again, my wife, my child, anyone connected to me. And I will use every legal mechanism and every remaining resource and every debt that anyone in 3 countries owes me to make the rest of your life extremely small. I won't touch you directly. I'll simply ensure that every door closes and every phone goes unanswered and every arrangement dissolves until you're operating out of a parking garage in Dundalk with 2 men and a grudge." His voice was not raised. It was the flattest she'd ever heard it. "Go home, Felix." The room held. Then Caruso turned and walked toward the east exit. His 2 men fell in behind him, with the specific relief of people given permission to stop doing a thing they'd already decided they didn't want to be doing. The door opened. The October night took them. Marcus followed to the perimeter to ensure the departure. The household staff on the wall began to breathe differently. Elena, who had stood with military stillness for however long she'd been standing there, sat down suddenly in a chair against the wall and put her face in her hands. Not crying, or not only crying, but releasing something that had been locked in her spine. Cole sat on the floor and didn't move. Dominic walked to him. He stood over Cole for a moment. Cole looked up. He had the face of a man who has already convicted himself and is waiting for the sentence, which is a specific kind of face and not a pleasant one to be on the receiving end of. "How long?" Dominic said. 8 months, Cole said. "From the day you were hired." "Yes." "What did he pay you?" Cole named a number. Dominic listened to it. His expression didn't change. "Was it worth it?" Dominic said. Cole didn't answer, which was its own answer. "Marcus is going to take you somewhere," Dominic said. "You're going to tell them everything, every contact, every document, every piece of information you passed, all of it. Then you're going to disappear. Not the way you're thinking. I mean, you're going to leave this city and this state and build a life somewhere that is very far from anything connected to my name, and you're going to be grateful that this is what I'm offering you." He paused. "Because I am in a generous mood tonight, which I won't be tomorrow." Cole nodded. His hands were still pressed to his side. Not critical. She could see that now. Enough to hurt. Enough to make the math clear without making it permanent. Dominic turned away from him. He turned and he found Vivian, who had crossed the room while he was talking to Cole and was now standing close enough to be reached. He looked at the cut above his eye. She looked at the blood that had tracked down his temple and dried slightly along his jaw. She lifted her hand and pressed it flat against the uninjured side of his face. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just the length of a breath. The room continued around them. Marcus's voice somewhere. The household staff beginning to move. Rosa appearing in the kitchen doorway and being gathered in by Elena. Gerald coming through the east entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face arranged into the expression of a man who has lived enough to know when a situation has shifted toward resolution. All of it continued. Dominic stood still with her hand against his face and breathed. Then he opened his eyes. "You came inside," he said. "I defined the perimeter differently," she said. His mouth moved, not quite a smile. The shape of one, the suggestion, the first attempt at it she'd seen from him in 48 hours. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She lowered her hand. "You are." "It's not bad." "I know, I can see that." She looked at the cut. "It still needs to be cleaned." "Yes." They stood in the main hall of the estate that had been her gilded cage for 3 years, surrounded by wilting anniversary flowers and the aftermath of a battle that had destroyed the last structural remnants of the life she'd been trying to escape. And she thought about the note on the pillow, and the rings, and the pregnancy test in the trash, and the bus to Philadelphia, and a diner on Chestnut Street, where a man had unfolded a document and placed it on a table between them. She thought about what it meant to be standing here, inside the perimeter, choosing to be. "The estate," she said. "What happens to it?" "It's part of the dissolution. It goes with everything else." He looked at the room around them, the space he'd built and occupied and controlled for a decade. "I don't need it." "Where do we go?" she said. He looked at her. The question contained everything. Not just tonight, not just the next week. The full weight of it. Where do two people go when one of them has burned her escape route and the other has dissolved his empire, and the city they're standing in holds nothing but history and enemies and the specific exhaustion of a life that has been running at maximum intensity for longer than either of them can sustain? "There's a property in Tuscany," he said. "It's in your name. Has been for 3 weeks." She remembered the document in the diner, the vineyard estate. She'd read that line and passed over it in the larger process of absorbing everything else. "In my name," she said. "Entirely. No connection to any entity associated with me. It was always going to be yours, regardless of what you decided." He held her eyes. "It still is. If you want to go there without me, I'll arrange the travel. I won't follow." She looked at him for a long time. He meant it. She could see that he meant it. Not as a performance, not as the kind of promise that dissolves under pressure, but as the actual fact of what he was offering. A door, genuinely open. The choice, genuinely hers. She had spent 4 months building a door. He had built her one first and not told her, and that was still something she was going to need to sit with for longer than tonight. "Together," she said. Something in his face moved, seismically, invisibly to anyone who didn't know the specific geography of it. She knew it. "Together," he said. Disa. They left the estate at 2 in the morning. Elena had been seen to, shaken, composed again in the way Elena always recomposed, insisting on making tea for the household staff before she would accept any attention herself. Rosa had been given Gerald's number and 3 months' pay in an envelope that Dominic assembled from the estate safe and handed to her without commentary. Marcus had taken Cole in a separate vehicle to a location that Vivian didn't ask about because she had decided, deliberately, that there were certain operational details that she was going to permanently elect not to know. She and Dominic drove south in a car Gerald drove, because Gerald had proven himself across 48 hours in ways that Vivian wasn't going to set aside lightly. She sat in the back with her shoulder against Dominic's arm and her hand resting on her stomach, and the window cracked 2 inches so she could feel the cold, moving air. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The city gave way to the bridge to the approach roads to the open highway. The country at 2 a.m. had a particular quality, cleared out, simplified, reduced to the essential shapes of things, road and sky, and the occasional light of a building set far back from the shoulder. 18 months, she said eventually. He didn't ask what she meant. Yes. You started the dissolution 18 months ago because you watched me laugh at a party. Yes. She turned the information over. She'd been doing it since the diner and she'd keep doing it for a long time. The specific complicated thing of understanding that he had done the right thing, eventually, and had done it too late, and had done it without telling her, and had done it entirely out of love for her, and that all 4 of those things were simultaneously true, and none of them canceled the others out. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me, what you did, the dissolution, the vineyard, planning the exit, it was right. It was the right thing." She looked at the road ahead. "And it also came 18 months after I'd started watching myself disappear. Those 2 things are both real. I'm not going to pretend the second one didn't happen because the first one is also true." "I know," he said. "Stop saying, stop." "Vivian." His voice was quiet. "I know. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking for the chance to be different in the time we have going forward. That's all I'm asking." She sat with that. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. Not a promise to undo the past, not an explanation that smoothed the edges off what had been real. Just, "I want the chance to be different." The acknowledgement that different was what was required, that similar, only more carefully managed, was not sufficient. "One condition," she said. "Name it. When she's born, when our daughter's old enough to understand what you were and what you chose instead, you tell her the truth, not a sanitized version, the actual truth." She looked at him. She gets to know that her father chose to stop, not that he was always different than he was, that he chose. There's something worth knowing in that distinction. He was quiet for a moment. She felt the quality of his silence, not resistance, something softer and more interior. "Yes," he said. "All right." She turned back to the window. "She," he said. "That's what you keep calling her when you talk about the baby." "I don't know that it's a she." "You keep saying she." She hadn't noticed until he said it. Some part of her had already decided. She didn't know if it was intuition or hope or simply the specific human need to give something unnamed a shape you can hold. "She," Vivian said, "until we know otherwise." Gerald drove. They flew out of a private airfield in New Jersey 4 days later. The 4 days in between were not simple. They were the 4 days of lawyers and document signers and asset transfers and final confirmations, of Dominic making phone calls that closed doors permanently and writing communications that would define the terms under which the remnants of his world would understand that a particular chapter had ended. Thatch managed the operational dissolution of the remaining network structures. Marcus supervised the transfer of the estate to a real estate entity for sale. Cole's full accounting was delivered, processed, and the resulting information used to seal certain vulnerabilities that Caruso and others might have considered exploiting. The kind of thorough sealing that Dominic was uniquely capable of because he understood the exact shape of every gap. Caruso went quiet. Whether that was strategic patience or the acceptance of arithmetic, Vivian didn't spend much time trying to determine. Dominic seemed satisfied that the message had been received. She trusted his read on that more than she trusted most things. She called Patterson once on the second day. She thanked her. She told her the situation had resolved differently than anticipated. Patterson, who was 61 years old and had seen a considerable variety of differently resolved situations, took the information with the composure of a woman who knew when not to ask follow-up questions. On the third day, Vivian went back to the motel in Harrisburg, alone. Gerald drove her. She didn't explain to Dominic why she needed to go. She just said she did, and he looked at her for a moment and then said to let Gerald know the departure time. She retrieved the blue dress from the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while in the room that smelled like industrial cleaner, the room where she'd shaken for 90 seconds and then stopped shaking, the room where she'd lain on her back and looked at the ceiling and allowed herself 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what she'd done and what she was carrying and what she was afraid of and what, underneath all the fear, she could not stop being. She sat there and she let herself feel it again. Not the same way. Not the fear or the grief. The other thing. The one that had lived underneath all of it since the moment she'd stood in a marble bathroom with a pregnancy test in her hand and known in the same instant that she was more frightened and more certain than she had ever been about anything. She pressed her palms against her stomach. She thought, I'm going to do better than frightened. I'm going to do what I chose. She folded the dress. She put it in the bag Gerald had brought. She took one more look at the room and then she left it. And this time she didn't look back either. And the difference was that this time she wasn't running from anything. The airfield was cold and gray and functional, no ceremony to it. A small jet. Dominic on the tarmac with 2 bags and Marcus beside him. Marcus, who was not coming, who was staying to manage what remained to be managed, who had served Dominic Varela for 12 years and was now shaking his hand with the particular gravity of 2 men acknowledging the end of something neither of them entirely has the language for. She watched them from a distance. She didn't want to interrupt it. Marcus said something. Dominic said something back. Marcus nodded. There was nothing more after that. No embrace, no extended farewell. Just the nod, and then Marcus walked toward the car, and at the door he paused and looked back once. His eyes found Vivian's across the tarmac. He gave her the smallest possible nod. She gave it back. Then he got in the car and was gone. Dominic came to her. He had his jacket collar up against the wind and his eyes were clear. Not the flat operational clear of the past 4 days, but something more interior than that. Something that lived behind the operational surface and only appeared when the operations were finished. He looked tired. She thought she probably looked the same. Ready? He said. She looked at the jet. She looked at the gray sky above it, which was the same gray it had been above the estate the morning of the search, the same gray above the Philadelphia streets, the same gray above the Harrisburg highway. October in the northeast. You could rely on that gray. Yes, she said. They boarded. Tuscany came up through the clouds on a morning in late October when the light was doing something particular to the hills. A quality of gold she hadn't seen in years. The specific warm spectrum light of southern Europe in the last weeks of autumn. She had her face against the window like a child, and she didn't care that she did. The estate was smaller than the Westchester property. By design, she understood, not grandeur, just space. A stone house set into a hillside, surrounded by vineyards running in winter-brown rows to the edge of a tree line. A terrace that faced west, with a view of hills that continued until they blurred into sky. A kitchen with a fireplace, a garden that had been tended recently, the soil turned, the beds prepared for winter. She walked through it room by room on the first afternoon. Dominic followed at a distance, not tracking her, just present, giving her the space of it. She understood he was watching her see it for the first time, and she let him watch. The bedroom window faced east. She stood at it and looked at the vineyards in the late afternoon light, the rows running orderly and silent toward the trees, and she thought about orderly things that grow slowly and quietly in the right conditions. She pressed her hand to her stomach. 5 months from now, approximately. She had an appointment with a doctor in the village below. She had the documentation in her new name. Both their new names, the ones Patterson's final gift had produced through channels she'd managed to keep clean despite everything. They were different people, legally. People who had not existed 2 weeks ago and who would build their legibility in the world gradually, from the ground up, in a place where no one knew what either of them had been before. She thought, she will never know this place as anything but home. Behind her, Dominic appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. He had found the kitchen and produced 2 cups of something hot, real coffee, from what the house's previous caretaker had left stocked. He held one out. She turned and took it. They stood at the window together and looked at the vineyards. "It needs work," he said. "The east section. The vines are older. We'd need to replant in spring." "You know about vineyards." "No," he admitted. "I've been reading." She looked at him sideways. "For 3 weeks," he said, "while the lawyers were finishing. I had time." A pause. "I thought it was something I should know something about." She looked back at the vineyard. She thought about a man who had run a criminal empire for a decade, beginning to read about viticulture in the evenings. The image had a quality she couldn't fully name, something that was almost tenderness and also almost grief, and also something that was neither. She lifted the coffee and drank. "East section first," she said. "In spring," he agreed. The light moved on the hills. The afternoon began its long slide toward evening, the gold deepening and then going amber and then going to the particular warm rose that came just before dark. Below them the village appeared in the growing light, windows lit, the sounds of ordinary life ascending the hill in pieces. A car somewhere, someone's voice, the smell of wood smoke. She had not felt afraid in 5 days. She was cataloging that fact the way you catalog something unfamiliar, turning it over carefully, not yet trusting it fully. But it was real. She could verify it in the specific quality of her own breathing, the absence of the low-grade muscular tension that had lived in her jaw and her shoulders and the back of her hands for 3 years. The absence of it was as identifiable as presence. She recognized the shape of it by the space it had left. Dominic set his cup on the windowsill. He said, "Whatever happens next, whatever it takes to—" He stopped, reformulated. This was one of the things she'd learned about him, had learned again in the past 4 days, that he was not naturally fluent in the interior. He could manage anything logistical, any operational complexity. The interior required him to stop and reconstruct. "I'm here," she said, to give him the space of it. "I know how much it cost you," he said. "To stay, to choose this, with me. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you gave up." She looked at the hills. "I didn't give up anything I chose to keep," she said. "I left a cage. The door was already open." She paused. "I walked back through it because I wanted to. That's different." "Yes," he said. "It is." She turned to look at him. The amber light on his face, the cut above his eye, healing now, a dark line that would fade in another week. The tired and the open and the specific quality of a man who has set down something he carried for a very long time and is still adjusting to the unfamiliar lightness of it. She reached up and touched the healing cut lightly with her fingertip. He didn't move, just stood and let her. "You owe me a conversation," she said. "Which one?" "In the car. Before we reached the estate." She held his eyes. "You said, 'Whatever happens when we get there, I need you to know something.' And I said to tell me after." His face shifted slightly. He'd remembered it. She'd known he'd remembered it. "After," she said. "It's after now." He looked at her for a moment. The amber light, the smell of wood smoke and vineyard earth, and the cooling air of an Italian autumn evening. "I was going to tell you," he said, "that however it went, even if you decided to keep going, to take Patterson's route and build the life you planned without me, I would have made sure you were safe, that the documentation was clean, that Caruso and anyone connected to him could never reach you." He paused. "I was going to tell you that I understand why you ran, that I'm not angry about it, that the most honest thing I can say is that if I were you, I would have run sooner." She stood with that. "And," she said, because she could hear that there was one, "And that I love you," he said, in the way that doesn't have a strategy attached to it. That's just what it is without the architecture around it, without the control or the management or the... He stopped. "I love you the way that's left when everything else is taken off." The evening came fully down around the house. The last of the amber left the hills, and the sky went to deep blue, and the first lights of the village below were bright in the dark. She put down her coffee cup. She stepped into him, not dramatically, not with the weight of everything said and felt and survived, but simply the ordinary act of two people occupying the same space, her forehead against his jaw, his arms coming around her, his hand resting against her back with a pressure that was careful and steady and entirely without possession. They stood like that in the window of a stone house on a Tuscan hillside. The vineyards were dark and quiet outside. The village lights held below. The sky above the hills was the dense, unpolluted dark of rural country, and the stars, when they appeared in numbers that the city never permitted. She thought about a child growing up under that sky. She thought about spring and replanted vines and the particular patience required to tend something back toward life after it's been neglected. She thought about how that patience was its own kind of courage, not dramatic, not visible, not the kind that gets witnessed by anyone, just the daily decision to show up and do the work and wait for what grows slowly to be ready. She was going to need that kind of courage. So was he. They both knew it. Outside the window, the night settled over the Tuscan hills in the way of all permanent things, completely, quietly, without announcement. The empire was gone. The war was over. The city that had held them was 1,000 miles away in a different life. What remained was this: a window, a hillside, a woman with her hand pressed to her own stomach feeling the first faint flutter of something beginning, and a man holding her like the thing he was most afraid of losing, which she had been all along. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She stayed.